Great. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming to today's GISS lunch seminar. I'm happy to present Sally Wang, who's a postdoctoral researcher at the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory working with Ruby Lung. She was recommended by Suzanne Bauer. And today, Sally, who completed her PhD at University of Houston, she's going to be talking about modeling wildfires and identifying key drivers in the contiguous U.S. Using machine learning techniques. So, Sally, thanks very much for agreeing to present today. We're recording this presentation for people who either would like that material available or know somebody who could not attend. And as with all of the seminars in the past, we're going to be using the chat for questions. So if somebody has, I can see there was a comment before in the chat. I think that's moot right now. So if somebody has any questions, please just indicate in the chat that what your question is or comment, and I can either unmute you and you can ask it, or I can just read it out to Sally throughout. So with that, Sally, please feel free to take it away. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for inviting over here. And today I'm going to present modeling wildfires and identify their key drivers in the contiguous US using machine learning. So here on the right-hand side, you can see it is a picture I took last year just outside of my apartment. It was a very smoky day in Richland because of the fires in Oregon, and all the smokes were transported to the Washington states. So you can see a very smoky day here. Okay, so before I get into my research, I would like to give you some background information about wildfires. So first, we know that a wildfire is an unplanned, unwanted, and uncontrolled fire in the wildland. And it can be caused by human beings and by lightning. So on the right-hand side, you can see that shows the time series of annual wildfire burn area in the state from 1983 to 2020. So you can see the blue line here shows an increasing trend of the burn area in the state. Then fires can have different impacts. So first, we know it can cause the property damages and life threats to people. And second, as I showed in the beginning, it can cause bad air quality. So again, here is a picture I took a random day in March versus the same day from my window. You can see, normally we can see the mountains far away, but on that day, we can't barely even see the houses over here. Okay. And also, fires can have both positive or negative impacts on ecology and can also affect weather and climate. Then I will talk about some controls of fires. So there are many different kinds of factors, and we can break it down to 4 different types, including human, weather, fuel, and topography. So for the human, as I said before, they can ignite fires, but they can also suppress fires. So human is a pretty important factor in controlling wildfires. Then also we have weather. Let me know my laser pointer. Okay, we have weather. So here I have an example from newspaper in 2013 that he shows the probability distribution of temperature in RH. And then you can see, consider all the grids in Western US under normal condition, the blue cross distribution over here versus when there's a fire occur and the fire size larger than 10 hectare, you can see the blue and red distribution over here. The temperature, actually when the fire occurs, there's a higher temperature and also the lower RH. The next one is fuel. So fuel is also an important factor controlling fires. So fuel must need to exist, and then different fuel types can affect the fire spread and fire severity. So here an example from Fence paper in 2015 that they shows actually different vegetation types can affect the fire severity. And then lastly is topography. So here I just have a very simple example here showing that when the fire spread rate will double for every 10-degree increase of the slope. So that's how all these factors together control wildfires. So you can see the relationship between the wildfires and its controls are usually nonlinear. So it provides an opportunity for us using these factors and the machine learning to try to predict and explain wildfires. Okay, so that's the kind of overview of wildfires. And then I will talk about the machine learning. So here shows a diagram, just kind of overview of different machine learning methods. So as we know, machine learning is a data analytic techniques that teaches the machine to identify or learn the patterns behind the data. So if we want to like separate different machine learning methods based on the learning types, we can have the supervised learning and the unsupervised learning. So for the supervised learning is a type of machine learning that we tell the machine the right answers during the learning process. Then the machine can utilize the relationship between predictors and the correct answer and figure out the relationship between them. While for the unsupervised learning, there's no correct answer. So we just ask the machine to figure out the patterns by itself. So in our tasks, we will use the supervised learning. So for the supervised learning, depending on the different tasks, we can further break down to classification and regression. So for our task, since we are trying to predict the burn area, so it can be categorized to the regression tasks. So within the regression task, we can use different types of method. The common method like neural networks, decision trees, and here today we are going to use an ensemble models. So for the ensemble models, it is basically we can consider it as a model, but within a model there are many sub-models within a model, and these sub-models together help these model to obtain a good model to obtain an accurate prediction. So for the ensemble models, there are some common models that people commonly used, including the gradient boosted model and the random forest. So for these type of models, they have some advantages, including it is widely used in many data mining competition, and usually the people who won the competition use ensemble models. And then second, we don't need to do the data pre-processing. So for neural network, you usually need to normalize the data. So it will take some of the time to pre-process these data, but we don't need to do that for the ensemble models. So that's why we choose the ensemble models for our fire prediction tasks. And then today we are going to use the extreme gradient boosting. So we call it as XGBoost. So XGBoost, the idea is that we will have multiple trees, but we will start from a single tree. As the learning proceeds iteratively, we will add another new tree trying to predict the error of the previous one. And then we will add a new one, so on and so forth. And eventually, the final prediction will be the summation of all the trees. So here I have a simple diagram try to show the idea of XGBoost. So we see in this example, we are trying to separate different signs. So we have plus and minus, and then we train the first tree, and the first tree made the prediction. So it separates plus and minus. But you can see there are some mistakes over here. So we will add another tree trying to fix this mistake. So it will make the second prediction, fix this mistake, but it still have some misclassification over here. Then we will add another one trying to fix this. And finally, we will have the final model that aggregate all the prediction trees, and eventually, based on these models, we will have an accurate prediction, trying to separate those plus and minus signs. So XGBoost generally is pretty fast and easy to implement, and it can achieve high performance. Okay, so we will use this model. And then when we have a model, the most important thing is that we are trying to learn from this model. So it is very important to have a method to measure which predictors are important. So traditionally, the default method in the XGBoost is called the gain method, but this gain method only provides the global interpretability. So the global interpretability here means that it measures the feature importance, consider all the data in your training or in your data set. But if we want to know, for example, for a single event, in our case, for a grid at specific month, we want to know which predictors are important, but we cannot get this type of information from the gain method. So that's why in this study, we use the Shapley Additive explanation called SHAP. So SHAP is a kind of novel interpretation method that provides both global and local interpretability. So we can know the important predictors for a single event, not just all of the data. So the idea of SHAP is that in a mathematical way, it is just averaging the differences in prediction over consider all the possible orderings of the feature, rather than just consider one type of the ordering of the features. So here I have a very simple example, just trying to let you know the idea of SHAP. So imagine we have 3 people together. We are trying to minimize the log here, which is you can think the log is the error in the model. So for training a machine learning model, we are trying to minimize the error. And we have 3 people. These 3 people are the predictors. So we want to know the contribution of each person, each predictor. So what do we do? What does SHAP do is that it measures the contribution of each person, consider all the orderings, ABC and then ACB. Together, we can have different combinations of the orderings and their contributions. Then for the SHAP, we will take the average of their contribution. So eventually, we can know for each predictors what's their individual contributions. Okay, so that's the SHAP. And then if we look at the math of the SHAP, so basically for the SHAP, for a certain feature I, we are trying to get the prediction with this feature and minus the prediction without this feature. And then we times the weighting factor that counting the number of permutation of the subsets. So together consider all the orderings and the feature contribution, then we sum up together and take the average. So that's the SHAP. And then just a kind of overview of the advantage of SHAP. So it has a relatively consistent variable importance. It has both global and local interpretability. And the SHAP interpretation can be applied to both a tree-based model and a neural network model. So it's pretty useful and powerful. Okay. And then so after I go over Fire's machine learning model that we are going to use today and the interpretation method we are going to use today, and then I can talk about the Fire model implement or developed in this study. So in this study, we are trying to predict the monthly total burn area and from the FPA FOD fire data in quarter degree. And then we use the tenfold cross-validation to evaluate the model performance over 2017 over CONUS. And then here, we only consider the grid that frequently burns. to make sure the model can have enough training data to learn from the fire and the predictor. And then we have several types of the predictors that we use. So first we have the local meteorology, including temperature, RH, U wind, V wind, precipitation, PDSI, the drought indicator, field moisture, and then energy release component, vapor pressure deficit. Then we also have some predictors that describe the land surface characteristics, including soil moisture, evapotranspiration, NDVI, topography, and land cover types. Besides these two, we also have the socioeconomical and coordinating variables to try to describe the impact of human on fires, including GDP, population density, number of campsites, longitude, latitude, and month. And here I want to highlight the last one. We developed the predictors that capture the impact of large-scale meteorology on wildfires. So we utilize the singular value decomposition method to extract the fire-associated large circulation pattern as a predictor. So I will talk about this in my next slide, just to talk about how do we develop these predictors. So in order to extract the large-scale circulation pattern that is associated with fires, we first consider the regions where fire is, can you see? Okay, where fire is frequently occurred. So including the Northern California, Southern Rocky Mountain, in the southeastern US. And then I will use the Northern California as an example here. So after we identify these regions, for each region, we will calculate the daily mean burn area for this region. And then we calculate the correlation between the daily mean burn area over the Northern California versus the gridded meteorology over here for RH, temperature, geopotential height, U wind, and V wind. And you can see here shows generally the fires over Northern California has a negative correlation between with the RH. So generally when RH over here is lower, the fires over Northern California will be increased. So positively correlated with temperature basically over California, and then positively correlated with the geopotential height. So you can see over here, and then negatively correlated with U wind and V wind over the Western US. After we derive the maps of correlation, then we use the SVD to extract the first two SVD modes that can represent the correlations data of the meteorology. So you can see for the first SVD, we see a positive weight over the California and most of the Western US. And this positively weight can correspond to low RH, high temperature, and high pressure with the strongest signal over California. And for the second SVD, we see a positive weight generally over Western US, and this positive weight can correspond to low RH and northwesterly winds over California and Western US. So with these to identify SVD, we can obtain the daily magnitude of these large-scale circulation patterns based on the daily meteorology. But one thing is that we are building a monthly model, but we have the daily SVDs. So we need to convert the daily SVDs to the monthly predictors. So what we did here, we calculate the monthly standard deviation of the daily SVDs. So the standard deviation over here, the meaning is that the smaller standard deviation is associated with burn area because the standard deviation represents the variation or the stagnation of the large-scale circulation pattern. So if the circulation pattern is stagnant over in a month, has smaller standard deviation, that means it is favorable for fires. The large circulation pattern is favorable for fires. So here we identify the negative correlation between the monthly burn area and the monthly standard deviation of the daily SVD. For the both of the two SVD, we see a pretty high negative correlation. So that's how we derive the predictors that represent the effect of large-scale circulation patterns. And then we did the same analysis for the Southern Rocky Mountain area in the southeastern US. Okay, so after introducing the model and the predictors, then we can check the model results. So here I show the mean observed burn area over 2017 on the top right A figure, and the prediction over here. So you can see generally the model can capture the large fire over California and then the southwestern US pretty well. But if you see the differences over here, which is the prediction minus the observation, we see that generally the model overestimate the burn area quite a lot. And then if we look at the distribution of the observation prediction, we see the prediction has the distribution is shifting toward right. So our model, even though it can capture the spatial distribution pretty well, but it tends to overestimate the burn area. And then since I only showed from the previous slides, I only showed the long-term average, but we also care about whether our model can capture the burn area at monthly scale for each single grid. So here, figure A shows the correlation between the time series of observed burn area and the predicted burn area. So we see that if the color is more bluish, that means better agreement between observation and prediction. Generally, over the grids we modeled, most of the grid has a pretty good correlation, where over 75% of them have the correlation larger than 0.4. And if we aggregate the burn area over CONUS and plot the time series over here, black line is observation, red line is prediction. We see that our model has a good performance in general. Then we also check whether our model can still does a good job for each single grid. So we select several grids in Western US, one in Oregon, Northern California, and one in Southern California. We see that generally the model can capture the temporal variability pretty well, especially it can capture the peaks over here, but still for these peaks, it underestimates them quite a lot. But for the Eastern US, we see here is a grid in Kentucky, and the temporal variability are quite different from the Western US. But with one single model, we can simulate the temporal variability well for both Western and Eastern US, even though their temporal variability is quite different from each other. And if we look at some event in southeastern US that is associated with drought, for example, for North Carolina in 2016, there's a large fires related to drought. And also for Texas in 2011, our model can also capture the peak, even though it underestimated a little bit. So that shows the performance of our model. Then we are also interested in whether including those SVD predictors really helps the prediction. So we conducted a sensitivity simulation that we removes the SVD predictors from our model and calculate the correlation in figure A over here and compare the distribution. And we found that Actually, when we include the SVD predictors compared to the model without SVD predictors, there's a significant improvement in for different regions in CONUS. So indeed, including those predictors that describe the large-scale circulation patterns helps the model prediction. Okay. So after talking about the model performance, one thing we really care is the variable importance. So basically, which variables are important for wildfires. So here we shows the global variable importance that is calculated by the absolute SHAP values. So just tell us, consider all the data in your data set, which predictors are important. So first we can see that coordinate variables, including longitude and latitude, they are generally important. And the second type is local meteorology, including RH, ERC, temperature, and VPD. So these two types of the predictors are important for fires in general. And then for the variables ranked below VPD, we see they contribute roughly equally the same. So that means besides these two types of the predictors, the rest of the predictor, they all contribute to wildfires, but roughly like contribute like small, all the same, but small. And then we can further utilize the local importance from the SHAP. So here shows the SHAP dependence plot. I know this plot is quite complex, but it's very informative once you understand it. So I will go over this plot with you. So you can see the x-axis here is the SHAP value. So just a quick reminder, the meaning of the SHAP value. So SHAP value is, you can think it is the contribution to the prediction. So positive means increase the prediction. So in our case, it's increase the burn area. And negative is decrease the burn area. So the x-axis is the contribution of the predictors. Y-axis is the predictor. And each dot here is the one grid at 1 month. So indicate one sample. And the color here means the feature value. So purple is high, yellow is low. So if we look at longitude, we see that longitude, when the longitude value is high, means more east side, and it will have the positive SHAP value. So it will tend to increase the burn area. And while for the west side, the lower longitude value will decrease the burn area. So basically, the longitude has a positive relationship with the burn area. Same for ERC and latitude. We see when ERC is positive, is purple, generally the SHAP value is positive, so it will increase the burn area. And the negative for the negative impact, it is associated with the low ERC. While RH is reverse. So RH, when the RH is low, so it's yellow, generally will increase the burn area, and the RH is high, it will decrease the burn area. So it's reverse relationship. So with one single SHAP dependence plot, we can clearly and quickly see the relationship between the predictors and the burn area. And you can see most of the relationships are pretty nonlinear. Then based on the global importance plot, we know that longitude and latitude, they are the top 1 and top 4 important variables in the fire prediction. So we want to know how the model utilizes longitude and latitude to help fire prediction. So here we plot the SHAP scatter plot for longitude. So x-axis is longitude, y-axis is the contribution of longitude. And we pick 3 grids from east to the west with positive and negative SHAP values. We found that the grids with positive SHAP value, usually they have the larger temporal variability in burn area. While the grids with negative SHAP value, we see the temporal variability is smaller. And especially for the grids with large magnitude of SHAP, either positive or negative, they tend to have the episodic event. So based on the SHAP, we know that the sign of the SHAP represent different fire regimes, different temporal patterns, and the magnitude of SHAP represent the episodic event. So based on the result, we can know that the machine learning model takes the coordinate variables to distinguish different fire regimes, different temporal pattern over a large continent. And we found the same thing for the latitude. And also, we also check the local meteorological factors. So here shows the SHAP scatter plot for VPD, RH, and ERC. We see that for VPD, as VPD increases, the contribution to the burn area will increase, and it is associated with high temperature. While for the RH, as RH increases, the SHAP value for RH will decrease. So it's a negative correlation. And you can see when RH is pretty low, lower than 25, generally it will increase the burn area. While for the ERC, as ERC increases, it will increase the burn area. So it's positive relationship. So all the relationship learned by the machine learning model are consistent with our understanding. So the machine learning model learns the correct physics. So it's not like the absolutely wrong. So we can make sure our model is learning the right thing. So after checking those how the model works, then we can utilize the information of SHAP to identify the important factors for different regions. So here we pick the large fires and we calculate the mean SHAP values for each features for the large fires and minus the non-large fires. We get the delta SHAP for each features, and we convert the delta SHAP to the percentage of contribution, and shows over here. So generally, we can see that for the Western US, ERC has the largest contribution. So ERC is the key factors contributing to the large fires in the Western US. While for the Eastern US, we don't see a leading factor, but here I want to highlight the SVD, the large-scale circulation patterns for the Southeastern US is actually contribute a little bit more than other factors for the Southeastern US. And then lastly, as I said, the SHAP can be used to identify the factors for a single event. So here we have the two case studies to demonstrate how we can use the SHAP to find out the drivers for single event. So here I show the time series of SHAP values in the color bar for each predictors, and the line shows the normalized burn area. So you can see for the southeastern US, generally there's no like a big fires, only these peaks, small peaks happens in spring. But you can see in 2011, there's an abnormal fire year for the southeastern US. And that is mainly related to the drought happens during that time. So you can see in 2011, September, there's a severe drought over Texas and part of the southeastern US. And if we look back to the SHAP plot, we see that for September 2011, drought, PDS represented by PDSI, and the VPD, actually they are contributing they have a larger contribution to the fire peak for this month. Another case is Northern California. So here, same, the SHAP, time series of the SHAP, and the line is the normalized burn area. We see for this region, actually the fires occurred like almost every year in the summer, but the driving factors are quite different year by year. So here we have an example in 2017 and 2014. We see that for 2017, actually the fires are mainly caused by the large-scale circulation pattern. You can see the greenish color, the SVD, and the pinkish color over here. And their combined contribution is 0.52. While for the 2014, we see their contribution decrease, but the PDSI contribution actually is increased, the purplish color. If we look back to the drought monitor, which is a independent source it's the different source, it's not including in our input data. You can see actually it point out a severe drought during that time in 2014, but there's no drought signal in 2017. So actually we can identify different drivers for the fire events by year. Okay, so that's how we can utilize SHAP. Okay. So just a quick summary of burn area model. So we built up a machine learning burn area model in the CONUS, and then we found out including the large-scale circulation patterns helps the prediction. And we identify ERC is the major contributor to the large fires in Western US. And then we can utilize SHAP to identify the key drivers for the two case studies in the southeastern US and the Northern California. Okay, so that's the first part of my presentation. And the second part, based on the previous model, we build up another model similar to the first one, but we are predicting the monthly fire PM2.5 emission from GFED. Same spatial resolution, but we extend our period to 2020, so that provide us a chance to understand the 2020 large fires. And then we also consider the grid that frequently burns, but we lower the threshold, so we can basically simulate more grids. And then we use the kind of the same set of the predictors, but we add something new. For example, we add the lightning flashes density. And for the SVD, we recalculated it based on the fire emission data. And for the land surface characteristics, we include the LAI, vegetation fraction, field load, and we normalize field load. And lastly, we remove the geographical and the time label, just trying to see whether without these information, our model can still does a good job. So here shows, so for this model, besides comparing with GFED, we also want to compare with the FireMIP process-based model and just trying to see which one performs the best. And for the one who doesn't perform well, how can we improve it? So that's the kind of the goal of this study. So here shows the spatial distribution of monthly mean PM2.5 emissions over 2000 to 2012. So we see that generally the machine learning model can capture the spatial distributions of the GFED pretty well compared to other FireMIP models. Most of them do not do a good job. Even some of them capture the wrong spatial distribution. But among these models, we found CLN is the one who performed better, where it captures the large, the hotspot of fires over Pacific Northwest and the southeastern US. But probably due to its coarse resolution, it overestimates them a little bit. And then we want to understand whether the model can capture both seasonality and interannual variability well. So we select 4 regions based on their frequency and their land types and ecoregions, and then trying to see whether the model can capture the seasonality and interannual variability for these regions. And due to the time limit, I will just talk about Mediterranean California and southwestern US. So for the Mediterranean California, you can see that for the seasonality, there's a bimodal pattern shows up over here. basically the fires peak in both August and in October. The black line is observation from GFED. And you can see none of the model can capture the bimodal pattern pretty well. Even though our machinery model, the red line over here, performs relatively better than the other process-based model, but still it kind of underestimates the peak in August. And based on the literature, we know that the peak in August can be attributed to the Santa Ana wind-related fires in 2003 and 2007. So we can also see a peak in 2003 and 2007 from the plot over here. But for 2003, again, none of the model can capture the peak correctly, except our machinery model kind of simulate the peak here, but still underestimated. While for the 2007, some of the model can capture the peak, but again, most of the model failed to do that. So if we look at the SHAP time series over Mediterranean California, and if we look at 2003 October, we see that actually the machinery model points out the variables that contribute a lot to this peak, including the ERC and the large-scale circulation pattern. Same thing for the September 2007. So we think the reason why the process-based model failed to capture the peak in fall is mainly because they probably don't have good parameterization to capture the effects of synoptic weather patterns. But our machine learning model has the SVD predictors that somehow include such information, and we can do a relatively better job than other models. And the next one is the southwestern US. So we see that for the southwestern US, there is only one peak in June. And again, most of the process-based model, they simulate the wrong seasonality, but only the machinery model and the LPJ sim model capture the peaks well in June. And if we look at the time series over here, we see that for this region, there's a very high peak in 2011. And then based on the literature, we know this event is associated with the very high VPD. So it's very dry and very hot. So we know it's related to VPD. So we check the VPD anomaly for the CONUS, which is the atmospheric forcing for these FireMIP models, and GridMat, which is the VPD sources for our machine learning model. We see that the GridMat shows the VPD anomaly well in 2011, while the CONUS does not show this peak in 2011. So we think the reason probably can explain why all the process-based model failed to simulate the peak in 2011 is probably can be explained by the bias in the CONUS data. So that's how we can utilize the machine learning and the interpretation method to diagnose those process-based models. So lastly, we also care whether the models can capture the extreme events. So here shows the spatial distribution of number of months with the large fire emissions. So for the machine learning model and for the CON model. So we see that generally the machine learning model can capture the spatial distribution pretty well, but it overestimates the occurrence of these large events over Northern California and the Pacific Northwest. Again, CON also can capture the spatial patterns, but probably due to its coarse resolution, it overestimates the occurrence over California and the southeastern US and Pacific Northwest. Okay, last slide. So as I said, we extend our study period to 2020, so that provides us a chance to simulate, to trying to understand the drivers of California wildfires in 2020. So you can see a satellite picture showing the smokes from the fires in both Oregon and California. There's a large amount of smoke. So here again, we use the SHAP, and here is the SHAP time series, and the line is the fire PM2.5 emission. So we see the event in 2020 basically can be explained by these factors, including the large-scale circulation patterns, the SVD2, soil moisture over here, drought, SPEI, and the fuel moisture and ERC and VPD. So basically, this event is a kind of compound effects from all the drivers, including drought, large-scale circulation pattern, and the dryness. So that's why the fires in 2020 is like so big, because it is a combination of all the effects. Just a summary of the fire emission model. So we develop a fire emission model and trying to evaluate and compare with the process-based model. And we explain the biases for the process-based model for Mediterranean, California, and the southwestern US. And both CON and machine learning model can reproduce the frequency map of the fire events, extreme fire events. And we found for the California wildfires in 2020, this event is caused by multiple factors altogether and leading to large wildfires in last year. Okay, and that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Great. Thank you so much, Sally. That was a really nice talk. Does anyone have any feedback or questions that they would like to ask? Hi, Suzanne. Yeah, do you want to ask a few questions?
Yeah, well, thank you. I do have a lot of questions, but I will just start with one so that in case other people have questions too. So one thing, sometimes you had all the abbreviations and it was a little bit hard to understand exactly what is what. So I do wonder when you did this SHAP analysis about the influencing factors, like slide 18, for example, I do wonder where the human, like the socioeconomic parts were. Did they show up at all?
Oh, because actually their importance is not, they are not very important. So these only shows the top 20 variables.
Okay,
yeah.
Right. So they were part of your model parameterization, so to say, but they were not showing up as important.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. And maybe I just squeeze in a second question. So because, you showed that it kind of works pretty well for the United States, but you also used the data from the United States as your training data set.
Yeah.
Would you think it would be interesting to use exactly that configuration trained with that data set on a different region, let's say for Europe or something? Because sometimes it is interesting to see how much of that is a pure dependency of variables and how much it might really depend how much you used that exact region for training. I'm not thinking about very different fires like peat and palm trees and agricultural burning like Africa and Asia, but something like, or you would use a smaller subset of data, because with machine learning, for me, it's sometimes hard to see what information you get because you had it all in your training data set.
Yes. So do you mean, is it possible that we use the same configuration, but we train on the European fires?
For example.
Yeah, I think is feasible, but we might need to replace some of the predictors, because for European fires, probably some factors are important, but we are not included in the model. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, but I mean the model structure can be moved to apply to the fires in other regions, but the predictors we might need to change it or adjusted based on the fire characteristics in over that region. Yeah.
Hi, Sally. I have a question. My name is Nancy King. That was very nice. Thank you. It was a nice way to back out the explanations for different fires or regionally. I have a question about the machine learning approach. How do you check for correlations between variables? Because many of these variables are correlated, and it was a little funny to see that in the Pacific Northwest, for example, burn area was negatively correlated with wind speed. So that wind speed must be correlated with times of when it's cold and humid or something. Otherwise, that would normally be the case. So how do you account for that?
Oh, the correlated variables?
Yes.
Okay, so basically the method we used, the XGBoost, is immune to the collinearity, because when the model split, it's a tree model, so it will take at one node, it will choose one variable to split. So for example, if temperature larger than 20 degree will go left, and if not, it will go right. So at each decision, it will only use one variables. So for the collinearity, I know the issue happens when you use both variables and they are correlated. But for the XGBoost, they will use one at a time. So it is immune to the collinearity.
So is your approach, is it order dependent then?
So can you repeat your question again? So
could these like this SVD and their tree approach, is it order dependent? So the variables that come first that might be dominating or correlated with later variables, they will then account for most the explanation of the variance.
yeah, I think it's possible, but when the model does the splitting, it only choose the best variable that can reduce most of the error. If the second correlated variable appear on the later split, that means there are more information that can provide. If it just disappear after the split, that means there's no additional information.
Right. Okay, because in your model, you later replaced some of the variables from the machine learning with others sort of as proxies. So maybe that could be done in the machine learning, another iteration, so that you actually get the actual correlations with the variables used in your model.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you, thanks.
Great, thanks, Nancy, for those questions. Does anyone else have anything else? I can't see anything in the chat.
Hi, can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm just wondering about, I guess, the effect of meteorology. I'm thinking about the Santa Ana winds, and on the one hand, you seem to have these, SVD variables that could, or even things like geopotential height that could tell you something about the prevalence of Santa Ana winds. But it seems like that could be really tough for a process-based model to resolve, just given just given the limited resolution. So for example, in Southern California, you have these winds coming off the desert, and they drop down from the high desert down to the LA basin, and they do it through a narrow pass. And the winds can be really strong, but it's almost impossible to get that. Actually, it is impossible to get that in a global scale model. I guess I'm also wondering, even about your machine learning model. I'm not sure. I mean, you have variables like wind speed, but presumably they're evaluated their input over a fairly large area. So can you just talk a little bit about spatial resolution and how important that can be in terms of predictors like the Santa Ana winds?
Okay, so let me confirm your question. So you want me to talk about whether how the resolution will affect the representation of Santa Ana winds in the fire prediction?
Yeah, I guess I'm kind of wondering, first of all, do you think process models have a chance to get that physical interaction? But even with machine learning, I'm wondering, are you really looking at winds on the right spatial scale to see the influence of Santa Ana winds?
Okay, so I think for that question, if you consider the spatial resolution of the process-based model, it is kind of hard to just use the wind at this resolution to trying to capture the effect of Santa Ana winds. But if you use the kind of the idea of the SVD predictors that we use in the model, it will the process-based model may have a chance to capture such effects, because for our machine learning model, it is not very fine resolution. It's only quarter degree. So I don't think within quarter degree the model can capture the Santa Ana winds, especially this case it incorporates the complex terrain. But the idea of the SVD, even though it's just one number, but it can represent the effects or the pattern of the effects of large circulation patterns on fires. So I think the process-based model may want to utilize these ideas of indicator, trying to incorporate the effects of Santa Ana winds on fires.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, so we had kind of another question from Andres. Andres, if you wanted to unmute yourself and ask it, you can. Otherwise, I can just read this from the chat.
Sure. Hello, everybody. I was just wondering, and I'm sorry if I missed this from the slides, but first, which ML model or algo you used, and then to what extent are your Shapley results related to the features that you chose, or your feature engineering, if any? Thank you.
Okay, so I use the XGBoost algorithm to predict the wildfires. And for your second question, are you asking, did I use the feature engineering to pre-process my feature, or?
I'm just wondering if there was anything that you found that was surprising that you wouldn't have seen or assumed from the features that you chose.
Oh, okay. I think so far the relationship explained by the SHAP is within my expectation, but I'm kind of surprised that, or I'm kind of happy that the SVD predictors does show in some important events. So I really like the example here. So we can utilize the SHAP to identify different key drivers for different events in California, because usually people may think, oh, drought is the only factors that causing the fires, but actually in some years drought is important, but in some years there's other factors like large-scale circulation patterns is important. Yeah.
So just very quickly, it sounds to me like without Shapley, you wouldn't have been able to see that in different places the driving factors are different. Is that?
Yeah, because the default variable importance, like the gain method in the XGBoost, you can only tell one, consider all the samples. So if you look at the global importance plot here, actually SVDs they don't have large contribution if you consider all the samples, but it shows up in a single event. Yeah.
Makes sense. Very nice presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. We're a little bit over, but I did notice that Robert Field has his hand up. Robert, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Can you go back to the 2020 Northern California slide?
Let me go back.
I think that was for the PM 2.5 emissions.
Yeah, this one.
Model. So sorry, is lightning showing up as in the SHAP? Is lightning showing up?
Actually, it does not, because we include, for this model, we include the NASA lightning detection, and it has a very coarse resolution. So you can see the dark purple over here actually has negative contribution, and I don't think it is important for this case at monthly scale.
Okay. I think I mean, if I remember correctly, lightning was sort of the main driver of the exceptional fire activity, the mid-August outbreak, that lightning barrage. And it was, I mean, it was sort of dry, but not off the charts dry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think because we are focusing on the monthly scale, so probably the importance will not be very significant. But if we consider like day by day, I think lightning might show up.
I just had one suggestion too, on top of the energy release component, and I'm thinking back to Nancy's comments about the wind. You might want to also include the burning index as a predictor variable, in that it sort of, when you think about like a physical model of fire intensity, it adds the wind component to, ERC is mainly fuel moisture, but the burning index will add the wind on top of that, and it might allow you to simplify your model and have fewer, it might roll up all of those physical drivers of fire intensity just by, and I think, you know, with all of the work being done in calculating the ERC, adding the burning index on top of that might be not too hard, and you might see some gains in simplifications from that.
Okay, I think it's a pretty good suggestion. Yeah, it is better to incorporate the predictors that consider the wind effects, even the wind include wind in as a predictor, but I think it's at the monthly scale. So probably at monthly scale, wind is not so important, but at daily or hourly scale, wind is pretty important. Yeah, okay, I will test that.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone, for all of your feedback. And thanks, Sally, for that great talk. I'll just remind everyone that this was recorded, so it will be available probably within about a week or two on the GISS seminar site and the YouTube. So, Sally, thanks again. And thanks, everyone, for being here. And I'll see you next time. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Sally.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Nice talk.